afternoon, students. Today we are going to learn about the skull as seen from the lateral aspect, that is the norma lateralis. First I will tell you about the bones which forms this view. There are many bones which you already learn in the frontal view and the occipital view and the norma verticalis or the superior view. Okay, but we will mostly concentrate on the sutures and bones which we have not seen in the above three views. Okay, so this is norma lateralis. Let me tell you first what are the bones which are seen in the skull when we see it from the lateral side. Now this bone here which is seen anteriorly here, this is the frontal bone. You already know about this frontal bone. Then this bone which is seen behind the frontal bone or posterior to it, it is the parietal bone. Okay, and behind this most posteriorly, this bone which is seen in norma lateralis is the occipital bone. And then here this bone which is seen here is the zygomatic bone. You can see here which forms the prominence of the cheek. So this is the zygomatic bone. Just behind the zygomatic bone, here what you are seeing is that a bone which is called as the greater wing of the sphenoid. Okay, so let me tell you, this is that greater wing of the sphenoid, and behind the greater wing of the sphenoid, what you are seeing is the temporal bone. So this bone is the temporal bone which has many parts. In this aspect we are seeing the squamous part of the temporal bone. Then we are seeing here the mastoid part of the temporal bone. Here is the external acoustic meatus which is bounded here anteriorly below and slightly posteriorly by an tympanic plate. Okay, this is the tympanic plate. So this is the mastoid process which is seen most posteriorly. Then what you will see here that this is a zygomatic arch. Okay, this is the zygomatic arch, and this is that the part of the maxilla is seen in the lateral aspect. This is the part of the maxilla is seen, and above the maxilla these are the nasal bones. Okay, we have already seen nasal bone, the maxillary bone, and below lower down here with the temporomandibular joint articulation we are seeing the lower jaw. Okay, this is the bone of the lower jaw. So these are the bones which are present or seen in the lateral view of the skull. Now I will keep this mandible aside, and then we'll tell you the various features as seen in the norma lateralis. Okay, after identification of the bone, let us come to the sutures. Okay, now the important suture here which you see here is an S-shaped suture here. Okay, and this S-shaped suture is called as the Terion. It is called as the Terion, and this Terion is the meeting point of the many bones. Anteriorly and above it is the frontal bone, anteriorly here and below is the greater wing of the sphenoid bone. This is the anteroinferior angle of the parietal bone, and this is the squamous part of the temporal bone. So these are four bones which are forming this S-shaped suture which is called as the Terion. Okay, now this suture which is here between frontal and that of the parietal is the coronal suture. So at this edge the coronal suture is coming. Then there is a suture between frontal and the greater wing of the sphenoid. Okay, this is the fronto-sphenoidal suture. Okay, fronto-sphenoidal suture. Then there is this suture here is the parieto, that is because this is the parietal and greater wing of sphenoid is below. So this suture here is parieto-sphenoidal suture. And then there is this is temporal and this is the greater wing of the sphenoid. So this suture is called as temporosphenoidal suture. It is called as temporosphenoidal suture is there. So temporosphenoidal suture, parieto-sphenoidal suture, and then this is the frontoparietal or the coronal suture, and this is the frontosphenoidal suture. These are the suture, okay, which will form an S-shaped sutures, and if you enclose an area covering all these suture here, okay, then this area is called as the terion, okay. And this terion lies in the floor of the fossa here, okay, which is a shallow fossa, and this is called as the temporal fossa. It is called as the temporal fossa. Let us go to the some other suture here, okay, and this suture is between here, this elongated suture which you are seeing between the parietal bone and that of the squamous part of the temporal bone, and this is called as the parieto-squamous suture or parieto-squamous suture. Simply it may sometime also called as squamosal suture, squamosal suture. So this is the parieto-squamous suture. Now then, if you prolong this parieto-squamous suture, then here it is lying between parietal bone here posteriorly and that of the mastoid part of the temporal bone. This is the mastoid, which is a projection here coming. This is the mastoid part of the temporal. So this suture here is called as the parieto-mastoid. This was the parieto-squamous, but the same continuation above the mastoid is called as parieto-mastoid suture. Then if you trace this suture, which we already seen in the norma occipitalis, it is the lower end of the lambdoid suture. This is called as lambdoid, parieto-mastoid, lambdoid. And then there is a suture between the occipital and mastoid bone seen in the norma lateralis. It is called as the occipito-mastoid suture. This suture is called as occipito-mastoid. And an area which encloses the junction of these three sutures, parieto-mastoid, occipito-mastoid and lambdoid, this is called as Asterion. This was Terion here in the floor of the temporal fossa, and here it is called as the Esterion. Okay, so these many sutures are seen. One important suture here is also seen between the frontal bone and the zygomatic bone. Fronto-zygomatic suture. Okay, fronto-zygomatic suture. And then you can see here, there is also a suture here between the temporal process of zygomatic bone and zygomatic process of this temporal bone, that is zygomatico-temporal suture, okay, which forms the arch. These are two processes, zygomatic process and this is the temporal process of the zygomatic bone. Zygomatic bone and parietal zygomatic process of the temporal bone. Now let us come to the bony features. We have covered the bones, identification of bones and the sutures which are present in between these bones. Okay, let us come to the features, some of the important bony features. Okay, this is the temporal lines. Okay, if you see this from this zygomatic crest here, if you trace this, okay, if you trace this, then you will see that there are the two temporal lines are seen. Okay, just I will put will try to make it with the pencil. Okay, to begin with, there are two temporal lines, a superior and inferior. To begin with here from this frontal bone, okay, these two lines, they are just single line and then they divide. There is one line which is the going above. See here where I am drawing it with the pencil. This is the superior temporal line, and just below that will be the inferior temporal line. This is that inferior temporal line which will just cross here and will come towards the zygomatic arch. So this was the inferior. The superior temporal line will disappear in the parietal bone while it is turning towards the temporal bone. Here it will disappear, but the inferior temporal line still can be traced right up to the above the external acoustic meatus, where it is called a suprametal crest. This ridge, it becomes a ridge, and it is known as the suprametal because it is the external acoustic meatus. So it is called as suprametal crest. So these are two lines, the superior temporal and inferior, which here both are crossing to that of the coronal suture. Okay, now to the superior temporal line, which is an arch-shaped area, there is attachment of the epicranial aponeurosis of the scalp. Okay, it is attached here, and the temporal fascia, a fascia which will extend from here and will get attached to the superior border of this zygomatic arch. This is the zygomatic arch. Okay, from here to here, and deep to it will lie the muscle, the temporalis. Okay, in this temporal fossa, shallow fossa, temporal fossa. Now to the inferior temporal line is the line which will limit the origin of temporalis muscle, which is having a wide origin from the floor of this temporal fossa. Okay, temporal fossa. Let us come to this structure that is called as the zygomatic arch. Okay, now this zygomatic arch, here we have seen that it is formed partly anteriorly formed by the zygomatic bone and posteriorly by the temporal bone. If you trace this zygomatic arch, it will show a superior border and an inferior border, as external surface and an internal surface of the zygomatic arch. But when you will trace this zygomatic arch backward, there will be coming a tubercle-like structure here. Can you see this tubercle? Yes, this is called as the root of zygoma, and it will divide into two process. Okay, or two, crest. One is going backward, that is the posteriorly. It is going above the external acoustic meatus and will continue as the supramastoid crest. It will continue as the supramastoid, or it will be fused with the supramastoid crest. Okay, this is the arch, root. Okay, that is called as the posterior root from the tubercle or the zygoma. Okay, root of the zygomatic arch, root of, and this is the posterior root of the zygomatic arch. But if you will see on the basal part, this will be the anterior root of the zygomatic arch. This was the root of the zygoma or zygomatic arch, and this is the anterior root, this is the posterior root, which continues with the supramastoid crest. Okay, but the anterior root form the anterior limit of this fossa called as the mandibular fossa. Okay, mandibular fossa. Anyway, next go to the, after this zygomatic arch and this temporal fossa and its temporal line, let us go to the external acoustic meatus. Okay, so I will tell you about the external acoustic meatus. Now this external acoustic meatus is formed by the two bones. Okay, it is above the superior border of external acoustic meatus, and part of the posterior border is formed by the squamous temporal bone. It is formed by the squamous temporal bone, while that of the anterior border, the floor and part of the posterior border here, it is formed by the tympanic plate. It is formed by the tympanic plate. So this is how two bones, squamous temporal and the tympanic plate, they form the boundary of the external acoustic meatus, okay, external. And see, just above this external acoustic, posto superior to this external acoustic meatus, you are seeing a depression here where I'm putting the tip of my pencil here, okay, and this is an area which is triangular shaped, and it is called as suprametal triangle. It is called as suprametal triangle, okay. And if you will break this suprametal triangle, deep to it will lie the mastoid antrum, okay. It is deep to it will lie the mastoid antrum, right. Let us go to the mastoid process, okay. This is a conical structure projected downwards and forward. It is called as the mastoid process, okay. It is part of the temporal bone, okay, and it is bounding anteriorly anterior to it will lie the external acoustic meatus, okay. It's the external acoustic meatus. But if you will trace this mastoid process upward, it will continuous with the squamous part of the temporal bone above this crest, suprametal crest, okay. This above this line, it is continuous with the squamous part of the temporal bone. Now this mastoid process may show sometime on its posterior aspect a foramina. See this foramina here, okay. Sometime it is here, sometime it may be here, okay, sometime it may be just deep, okay. And this is the mastoid foramina which gives passage to the emissary vein which connect deeply with the sigmoid sinus, okay, to the superficial vein to that of the sigmoid sinus. Now important aspect here is that just posto superior to this mastoid process, you are seeing the meeting point of the three sutures. One is the peritomastoid, is this suture, peritomastoid. Another is that of the occipitomastoid, and this is the lowermost part of the lambdoid suture. An area enclosing this all three sutures here is, as I said also previously, it is called as the Asterion. This is known as the Asterion. Now let us come to another aspect of the structure seen from the lateral aspect, and that is the stellite process. But in this stellite process is usually broken in the skulls which we study in our classrooms, okay. But this stellite process is a bony process. It is a bony process which is about 2 to 5 centimeter long, okay. I will have to show you with the help of a diagram since it is not here. Let me show you with the help of a diagram from my book on osteology. Now this is the human osteology by me, and this is published by PP, okay. With thanks to them, we are using this diagram of this is the bone that is called as the temporal bone, as we are seeing the temporal bone of the left side, okay. This is temporal bone, and this was that zygomatic arch. This is the mastoid process. This was the site for Esterion, okay, because it is an isolated temporal bone. This is here, what you see is the tympanic plate is here, and this projection which lies in front of the mastoid process, which is going downward, forward, and it will go slightly laterally also, okay, slightly laterally, not laterally, it will go slightly medially also, that which may have a sharp tip also sometime, okay. And this is called as the stellite process. Now this stellite process which is broken in this skull will give attachment to the two ligament, stylomandibular and stylohyoid ligament, and it will give attachment to the three muscle, stylopharyngeus, styloglossus and stylohyoid muscle. So two ligaments and three muscles are attached to the stellite process. Okay, once you have understood the stellite process, let us go to another feature which can be seen from that of the lateral aspect, okay. and that feature is the temporal fossa, part of the temporal fossa, which is a shallow fossa on the lateral aspect of the skull. I have already covered. If you will see the boundary of this, anteriorly it is bounded by this posterior surface of the frontal and the zygomatic bone. See where I am putting my finger. This is the posterior surface or the temporal surface of the frontal and that of the zygomatic bone, okay, which will be bounding it anteriorly. The boundary which is posterior and superior, this boundary, see the superior boundary and the posterior boundary, it is bounded by the temporal lines, okay, which I have already drawn with the help of pencil. So superiorly and posteriorly it is temporal lines, and anteriorly by the frontal and or the temporal surface of the frontal and the zygomatic bone, which is bounding it. Now, if you will see the inferior boundary, then it is the superior margin or superior border of the zygomatic arch. Okay, that will be bounding it, I mean to say inferiorly, okay, inferior. And then there will be the mandible will be there, okay, inferior and onto the, not mandible, inferior and onto the medial side, okay, here. Inferior, this was inferior and lateral side boundary, and here it is inferior and medial side boundary. I will try to show you a crest, bony ridge. See this bony ridge here, okay. This is called as infratemporal crest, okay. If I will show you here, it will not be possible, but this is the infratemporal crest, okay. In your skull, you can see it's very well marked ridge, okay, or crest is temporal crest, okay, infratemporal crest. And this is in the greater wing of the sphenoid. Most of its part is in the greater wing of the sphenoid, okay. That means from the greater wing of the sphenoid, this is lateral surface, and then it will be the inferior surface of the greater wing of the sphenoid is so infratemporal. Now between infratemporal crest, which is medial and inferior boundary of the this temporal fossa, and between the medial and lateral boundary, which is superior border of the zygomatic arch, if you pass your finger, the finger can pass between this, okay, and through this gap, this temporal fossa will communicate with another fossa here, that is called as infratemporal fossa. I will teach you the infratemporal fossa in the next video, okay, along with this pterygomaxillary fissure and pterygopalatine fossa, okay. This I will teach you in the next video, this area. We are now today limiting above this, okay, to the lateral aspect, okay, lateral aspect. So this is how the temporal fossa is there, and as I already said, to the superior temporal line is the temporal fascia attached, which is covering to the temporalis muscle, and the content of this temporal fossa are the temporal muscle, the temporal artery, as well as the nerve, okay. So it will be the temporal vessels, deep temporal vessels and nerves and temporal muscles, will be there. Now this floor of this temporal fossa is formed by all these bones, frontal, parietal, squamous part of temporal and greater wing, and it consists of the H-shaped suture, which we have learned is called as the Terion. That is the floor of the temporal fossa, okay, temporal fossa, its floor is there. Now I hope that this completes the lateral aspect of the skull. The next video will be on the infratemporal fossa and this pterygomaxillary fissure, and deep to it pterygopalatine fossa, okay, the pterygopalatine fossa. Thank you very much for watching this video on the norma lateralis.